everybody can hear everybody except for me on the actual presentation.
We can't hear you.
No, I know. So there's not much I can do about it
Am
now.
I heard?
Yeah, everybody can hear me except you guys. I think it has to do with the cast. Anyways, you can open the door, Trey, and just let them hear me talk, or they can sit in here. Unfortunately, I normally would use my laptop so I could be out there, but the problem is my laptop's not very dependable right now. So I'm actually using my big monster desktop to do this broadcast today. So just as Ken said, I've been involved with Stratford Field Naturals.
Who's our company coming?
Oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah, you guys can park your butts here. So basically, that was many, many years ago. Anita could speak to that. I was around at the time that she and I both served on the executive for Stratford. And, lately I have not been as involved with the field naturalists just because I'm involved with a lot of other things. But I certainly keep an eye on what you guys are doing and the trips that you do and things like that. And it's great when you guys come out to Westport Wetlands because I can just zip over and Steve and those guys are taking everybody around. It's awesome because it's actually been a really great site. I will say that as I talk about the atlas, I am well aware that this atlas, unlike the other two atlases, has turned to a lot of technical aids to assist the atlasers. And I know I'm probably at the top end of a lot of tech savvy people that are starting to reach that age where once you get beyond that, a lot of people just don't know the tech. And that has been a real struggle for the atlas trying to get birders engaged, to be honest. But on the other flip side of the coin, to put it in perspective, the whole second atlas probably collected upwards of 150,000 breeding evidence records. In year one of the third atlas, we've already exceeded 400,000 breeding evidence records. So yes, the data will be somewhat different. It will be collected differently, but I'm hoping that the gurus that runs, they look at the statistical models and things like that, especially for the point counts. Point counts though really haven't changed a whole lot, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But just in terms of incidental, as Ken said, you do not need to be seriously involved in the atlas to contribute to the atlas. You can literally sign up as an atlaser, and if you happen to be driving down the road and see something sitting in a field or sitting on a nest and you go, hey, that looks like one of those, and you check it out and sure enough it's something on a nest, you could actually go in and put that in as an incidental report, and that still goes into the atlas. You have literally no obligation to any square, and that could be anywhere in Ontario, and that's the beauty about the atlas this time around. So the atlas was redesigned in a way that I'll get to the technical side of it in a minute, but in terms of what we're trying to achieve, for those that have I know there's a few on this call right now that are atlasers, registered atlasers this year, and in the first year of Atlas 3, but there's many of you that probably aren't. And I will say this, that the beauty about this atlas is you can literally be driving around anywhere in Ontario, and if you see something, you can contribute to that square and put your record in. And there's ways to do that easily online. I have it on my phone. There's an app now that comes on both iOS, like for Apple phones, iPhones, and also comes for Android. And it's pretty slick. The only problem is that you have to go into areas like I was today north of Wing, where I couldn't get enough bars on my phone to actually drop the checklist like live down to the server. So I actually, would save it on my phone and then put it in when I get back to my Wi-Fi. So all of these sort of things were brought into consideration. And what's the purpose of the atlas? The atlas is basically trying to look at the relative abundance of the 300 or so species in Ontario, which includes the point counts. So when we're talking abundance, that's what the point counts are for. They're trying to get numbers of birds. When we're talking about the breeding evidence, that's trying to get the distribution and knowledge on where these birds breed. And why would that be important? Well, it's important because, the first atlas was back in the first part of the 80s, 81 to 85. It's a 5-year project. The second atlas ran from 2001 to 2005, and Anita and I were both involved in that. I believe Steve Thorpe was involved in that. Harold, you might have been involved in that. I can't remember if you were or not. And certainly it's interesting to see, even between Atlas 1 and Atlas 2, there were changes occurring. And then we get to Atlas 3, and already after year one, we're starting to see some things pop up that are just extraordinary. Most of you may or may not have seen a raven in Southern Ontario lately. I can tell you that our first RC meeting, when we were talking about the first year data kind of starting to get analyzed a little bit, ravens have been found in almost every square in southern Ontario below the shield this year or last year, just year one. That includes like family groups, nesting, the works. And it's extraordinary because you couldn't have found a raven down in this area. Like we used to watch for them at Hawkcliffe and say, hey, there goes a raven, first one in like 5 years. And now suddenly I'm seeing family groups in almost every square that I'm looking at. And that's in Huron Perth, right? That's not even in some of these, you know, they're northern parts of the province and stuff like that. So anyways, the atlas is structured in a way that, as I talked about, there are a number of regions that cross the whole province, and I mean the whole province, right up to the top in the Hudson Bay, all the way down to Middle Island in Lake Erie. And those squares, or those regions, are numbered 1 to 48. And we are in Huron Perth, number 6, okay? And I look after the entire region of Huron Perth. And there's one RC to 2 RCs look after each of the regions all the way up. And that goes right up there. You know, in the north, the regions are much, much bigger, of course, because the access is much harder to get. So when I talk about Region 6 and Huron Perth, it's not a perfect outline to Huron Perth. So what's Ken was talking about earlier is that sometimes you get a region like Region 4 Middlesex that actually has a little chunk of Perth in the top end of it and things like that, because there's lines that they drew more lines for the regions that don't quite match the counties. But that aside, most of Huron Perth as counties is in Region 6, okay? Now, once you get beyond regions, you go into something called a square. And in everything south of basically Sudbury and down is basically chopped up into squares that are 10 by 10 kilometers. And those squares run right from Essex, Windsor, all the way across to Ottawa, Cornwall, and all the way up to Sudbury and across to the Quebec border. And those 10 by 10 squares are given a fancy little designation, 17 TMJ 10, say. And each square has a unique designation within that square. You can find it on a map, okay? Once you get above Sudbury, they go into what's called blocks. And the blocks may contain, I think they're 100 by 100 kilometers. And those blocks are then maintained, numbered all the way up to literally up to the top end of Northern Ontario, okay? So when Ken was talking about being assigned a square, the difference in Atlas 3 is that we do have primary atlasers, and those individuals are somewhat responsible for just kind of keeping an eye on the square and the species that you're seeing, and you know how well the breeding evidence is going and the point counts and things like that. But there's lots of other people may contribute to the square. So anybody driving through my square here in Mitchell is 17 TMJ 81. And if a bunch of you guys go out to the wetlands and everybody goes, hey, there's, you know, some Canada geese on nests and they're obviously got, you know, eggs in the nests and things like that, you could put those into my square and I will see those come up on my report as the regional coordinator. I will see those actual entries come up. So the atlas this time around is very, very, the approach is a little more wide open to everybody to contribute across the province. Instead of trying to assign and say, you are responsible for this spot, you're going to try and get as much as you can, okay? And I like it. I think it's a better model, but you know, I just don't know how much is going to affect the data from a statistical point of view. But there's no question that we're already seeing some interesting results. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to quickly share my screen, and hopefully this works again, and we'll see if it does. Okay.
Oh,
No, that bird we don't get in Ontario. You guys probably saw that spatula tail. Okay, so what they did when they made the atlases, there's 2 main websites that you can go to actually explore the atlas. You know, if you're interested, and that's my goal tonight, is to try and see if anybody else is interested in joining up. Because honestly, in here in Perth, we're a little light on actual birders that have been able to take on and sort of be responsible for squares, at least from a point count point of view, and trying to get some of the breeding evidence. This is the main website for the atlas. Okay, it's designated under birdsontario.org. There are 5 main entities that look after maintaining everything for the Breeding Bird Atlas of Ontario, and they include Birds Canada, Canadian Wildlife Service, the OFO, there's 2 or 3 others, okay? But all those entities are responsible for trying to maintain things like this website and the database website, which is Nature Counts. So if you're really interested and want to find, like, I'm not going to go through this entire website. There is a ton of material here, but certainly you can work your way across and it'll explain what the atlas is about. It'll explain why we're doing it. You go into things like, that's all under here, okay? It tells you who the partners are and what the team is and who's the regional coordinators and stuff. You get into things like instructions and forms, special surveys for owls and nightjars and marsh birds, and you get all this data, different stuff of how to do things, right? Coding sheets, when you should be looking for birds breeding and things like that. This one shows you how to get registered, okay, and how to contact the committee if you want to. You can register online. You can talk to me and I can help you get registered if you're interested. And this one's kind of interesting because they just got this updated. So now you can actually go back, and I think Ken was trying to show you the actual physical atlas, because 1 and 2 were actually big physical atlases that were books, and they were fantastic books. But you can now actually see all those atlas pages and stuff like that. They basically started uploading all that within the website itself, and that's pretty neat. Okay, so this is the actual, what we call the home of the Breeding Bird Atlas for information and so on. And by the way, folks, like I'm going to go on and continue to do this, but if anybody has a really like pressing question and they are really interested in the atlas, don't be afraid to interrupt me if you want to ask a question, because there's a lot of stuff here, and I'm just going to try and like sort of give you the rough outline of what you can tackle. Okay. Now that's the main web page for the Atlas home, but the main web page for doing your data entry is actually this guy here. And you notice it's the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, and this is actually under Birds Canada, and it's called Nature Counts. And Nature Counts is kind of like, if any of you know Ebird, this is the Canadian version of like what we would call Ebird. Okay, it's because the Canadian guys want to own their own data instead of using Ebird to collect it, because that was discussed. But data by Ebird is stored down US side. Cornell and so on has all the servers and stuff. So Nature Counts is the Canadian and Birds Canada side of the world that want to store data. And that not only includes the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, that's every breeding bird atlas across Canada, because there's now been one in pretty much every province. I'm not sure about the territories. Ontario is one of the oldest because we're on our 3rd, where some provinces only got 1 done so far. So just be aware of that. There are other breeding bird atlases that are being done across the country. So all that data is being stored on the Nature Count servers, and I can go in as the regional coordinator and actually see what is going on at any given time by looking at the data forms that are coming in. And then I actually, on the other side over here, I can actually manage and go into data review. And if I go in there, I can see what records are actually being sent in that I have to actually look at. Now that's because honestly, there's a lot of cases where unusual species that are rare to the province, species that are rare to the region, or species that are a species of interest to the guys doing the analysis, they will say, hey, can we please get you to take a look at these records? These ones need a little bit, maybe a little more detail, and so on. So as regional coordinator, my job is to get it reviewed, and then we put it up to another level, which is then reviewed at the provincial level. So even though you might put in a bald eagle sitting on a nest, because that's still a species that is regionally rare, you would put in the details about it. That record would come to me. I would put a flag on it and say, yep, I know this guy. He knows what he's talking about, or he's sent me photos, and this is exactly what it is. And that will now go up. So all that technology and everything like that is handled on 2 websites. The home website that has all the information on how to do things, and the Nature Counts website, which is the main database that stores all the records. Okay. And basically that's it in a nutshell from the technology online. On your phone, they now have an app that allows you to do this submission. So if I go here and it says submit data, I could actually then pick a square from my group or my squares. So I'll say I'll go to Mitchell. Can you guys see that map okay? Just give me a nod if you guys okay.
Yep.
So this map is a map of Mitchell, map 17 TMJ 81, which is identified here in the red. And if I actually flip that to satellite and go in a little bit, you can see that this is Mitchell. And then if you go down here, what's really interesting is they were able to transfer the Ebird like the bird hotspots, that's the red thing here, is the
Mhm.
Mitchell Lagoons, right? Anything else that you see in blue, the blue ones, are my entries as part of the atlas. Okay, so everything that you see in blue there, those are all my entries that are part of the atlas. Okay, and that's kind of cool. So basically, my job has been to go around Mitchell and see if I can find what I can find in my 10 by 10 square. My square ends before Brandy Point, it ends before Dublin, and then up in the north, it goes just over Bornholm, and then out to the east, it goes just down Highway 8 a bit, out to almost that farm implement place out to the east of Mitchell. Okay. So now Anita was talking about her and Vicky were doing squares, and if I actually slide over to the right here a little bit, you'll notice that we actually get to Stratford. And it turns out Stratford has its own square, and that is 17T NJ00. And that square is the first one in that row going up, and that's the bottom right corner of the region for Perth. So as you can see, there's obviously ones below that that are still Perth County, but now they're in Region 4. And that would be Pete Reed and George Persitis as RCs would handle that. And that goes all the way down to Middlesex Elgin, right to Lake Erie from that spot. And it's a huge region. Okay, so Region 6 has 48 squares, 10 by 10 kilometers. Region 4 has 70, probably 74 or something like that. Okay, that's why they've got two RCs for it. And then if we go north, you get into the Ellis Swamp, for instance, and that one is 17 TNJ01. And I think Anita, is looking after some of that for me. So again, they've got the hotspot there. So when I'm entering data, I would put a point on the map and say, hey, I had a yellow warbler on a nest potentially in Ellis Swamp, or I had woodcock or sandhill cranes up at the north end there by that pond and things like that. So that's basically it in a nutshell as far as data entry online. On my phone, I get this exact same sort of thing, but I do it on the phone and I can literally do the checklist right in the field. And that's what's made a huge difference with people getting many, many more checklist entries in. Because when it's on my phone, I can literally stand there, pick my point. I know exactly what square I'm in because GPS on my phone tells me where I am. And then it literally is like just list, and put in the breeding evidence if there is any. You say send, and away it goes, and it's already down in the database, and I go to the next one. And then when I go home, I don't have to actually sit down on my computer and put that data in like I used to do with the notebook when I had to write everything out in my notebook and bring it home. Mm-hmm. Okay. And this is why we're seeing so many data points go into the database. And it's been very slick. So the other thing I'll mention, I think that's enough of the actual two websites. The other thing I will mention, and Ken kind of brought this up too, is that we are atlasing differently than we did before. And obviously we talk about point counts. So let me show you something on point counts here. Does everybody know what a point count is? Pretty much everybody. Anybody ever done a point count? I know Steve and Anita and some of them have done it. So a point count basically is where you go in and you actually say, I'm going to stand at a point for 5 minutes and I'm going to count every bird that I see or hear at that point. I might get some breeding evidence, but even if I don't, my job is to count as many of each species as I get within a range of so many 100 meters. Okay. And this is what makes it tricky for a lot of people that think about joining the Atlas, but get a little leery of doing it because they think they got to do all the point counts on a square. And that's not true this time around because we're actually bringing in, like even myself, I'm doing extra point counts on other squares. We're bringing biologists in that come in and just go through point counts on squares for you. They can do it in a morning or two, and that's been really useful. But again, if I go to Mitchell again, and this time what you'll notice is not only is there some blue in there, but there's all these green, like green spots with white numbers circled. You guys see those? Mm-hmm. So each of those ones that are in green are point counts that I've now done on my square. And those are preset randomly and they match the first atlas and the second atlas. So those point counts have not changed. And this is now like 40 years later. We're on our third atlas and then we're doing the same point counts again. And that's exactly what Ken was saying. It's because you want data consistency from the same points as you had. The only problem is at number 6 down here, this guy right here is now a subdivision with a house on it. Yeah. So that makes it pretty difficult, right? So part of what we're seeing in Atlas 3 is that it's been enough time that some of the topography is actually drastically changed for some of these point counts and things. So you end up having to skip that one and just move on to 21 because we're doing 1 to 20, or sorry, yeah, 1 to 20 on-road point counts, and then we do 5 off-road point counts. And that means being like right off the road, at least 100 meters in a bush lot or some other terrain that you can get away from the roadway at least 100 meters. So it's really interesting to do point counts. I find it like that's one of my favorite parts of the Atlas, but you have to have a good ear, you have to be able to bird by ear, and you have to have good hearing, of course, which is part of the reason why we lost some of our more elderly atlasers because they simply can't hear birds in the higher ranges and stuff anymore. So that's unfortunate, but it's very, very true. And it, you know, we all go through that. And my eyesight, I just got new glasses as well, and they are better, but I hear way better than I see. So I do a lot of my birding by ear, to be honest, and that helps a lot on the point counts. But what they added this year for this Atlas is that they're actually doing recorded point counts. So if you are incapable of hearing or really being confident in identifying birds by ear, they actually have these zoom units, they call them, and they're 360-degree recorders. And you park them on top of your car on a little tripod. You click go, you stand there for 5 minutes, let it record everything, and then you just go on to the next one. You hit stop, you go to the next point count, and you do it again. And these things have been very, very revealing because people are only so good at understanding what they're hearing and sometimes don't pick things up. But when you send these things into the guys that really know what they're doing, they'll actually listen to the recordings and they pick up just about, it's amazing how well these things can hear out even 100 meters or more. So pretty amazing. Yeah. Yep.
How long did you do the point count was?
Oh yeah. I should mention that. My dad just pointed out point counts. The other thing about point counts is you only have to do them once over the whole 5 years. You don't do point counts every year. So that's another thing to understand is that you only are responsible for doing point counts if you're going to take it on the one time in the whole 5 years, because it is a 5-year project. And the other thing I should mention is they're asking that even in a given square, they only want they want about 20 hours or so or more in a given square. But you know, that's when you put that over 5 years, that's literally only 4 hours out of a whole season that you have to put into a square. And again, you know, I've got a lot of the squares covered in my region right now, but you know, I've taken on a few. My buddy Matt has a few. Anita and Vicky have a couple. You know, Ken's got one. Brent Musser's got one. I'm trying to think who else is on the call that might have one. But anyways, like Dolan Bonnert has a square. He's a good young bird. So, you know, there's not a huge responsibility there, but you know, think about it. If you're out and you're putting eBird reports in, even if you can't hear the birds great, but you're still doing a lot of eBird reports, you can actually now put them in nature counts first, and it will push them over to eBird. Or you can go and put them in eBird and come to nature counts and say import them from eBird, and it'll pop it right in. One database or the other. It's just one's in the US and the other one's in Canada, right? But they made an agreement with eBird that we can either link our profile and push our nature counts reports over there, or we can actually put them in eBird and just import them back into nature counts. So that's kind of slick too. So I don't know how many of you guys do eBird. I know Steve and myself and Anita and a few others do it, but and Harold, I think. So yeah, it's pretty slick. But that's because of all the technology they threw at it. And one of the last things I'll mention is, so then we get into what we call the northern part of Ontario. It gets much, much more difficult to obviously do point counts because there's not a lot of roads up there, and certainly just general atlasing to try and get into these regions. So they do canoe trips where they go in multi-week canoe trips. They'll drop people off by float plane. I'm going up to Grundy Lake Provincial Park in June to get eaten alive by black flies and mosquitoes. But they're doing what we call a square bash, where we get about 30 people. We're going to go in and try and do as many squares in and around the park as we can. So that's pretty cool, and I'm looking forward to that, even though I probably am going to, get eaten alive. So those things that they do up there, those are prearranged, and we try and get people into those areas. But of course, with the pandemic, this put a real wrench in things because no one was allowed into the north, especially into indigenous lands. And so as a result, we had to basically totally do most of the atlasing was occurring south of the Sudbury region and all that sort of thing. So now this year, finally, they're starting to arrange some canoe trips and stuff up north. Okay, because that was a huge deal. We couldn't get into the north and just with pandemic rules and things like that, we couldn't do any in-person training. We couldn't do in-person mentoring. So it's been very, very difficult to get the Atlas off the ground. And yet, even despite all of that, we still got hundreds of thousands of checklists, records, and things like that. So good news there. But the last thing I will mention, I'm going to mention one more thing technology-wise. In the north, because it's so difficult, they've started using these autonomous recording units. And again, these are units that are placed in a spot in like areas where they know they're going to get good recording, and they'll leave them out there for a while, and then they'll collect them up and they'll actually listen. And we had Ken Burrell came on, and he was telling us that when they got some amazing finds up there. They had a brown thrasher up on like James Bay. They had an eastern bluebird up that way. They had Connecticut warblers, just like a ton of Connecticut warblers showing up on these recordings. And the one that really was amazing was great gray owls. He said there was so many great gray owls, it was like red-tailed hawks down here in the regions up there. So, you know, I think, yes, the technology has changed the way the Atlas is being done, but I also think it's going to really help us understand better what is really going on with the populations with some of these birds, because too often we depend so solely on, you know, what people can see themselves and so on, that until we start doing things autonomously and so on like that, yeah, I think it's going to help the Atlas quite a bit. So Atlas 3 analysis against 2 and 1 might be a little skewed, but I'm hoping that it actually shows a truer picture of what's going on with some of these species, because we are also finding the negative. Like there are definitely species that just aren't being heard or seen. And even in year 1, and that's scary. There are species that just seem to have disappeared. So, you know, in the long run, when this Atlas finally gets, you know, processed, all the data, you know, around about 2026, 2027, and they actually produce the final take on all these species and stuff, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what's there, but it's also going to be scary. I think we're going to find that some of our thrushes and some of these other species are just gone in terms of numbers. So, yeah. Anyways, anybody have any questions? Because that's basically it for me. I just wanted to kind of put all that out there, but I'd gladly take any questions from you guys if you got anything you want to ask.
Let me just, talking about the technology, let me just remind people about Merlin. This is something that I used last year, and I'm going to continue to use it because I think it's great. This is Shazam for birds, as I call it. It's a recording app, and it takes a recording, and then it suggests to you what might be heard in that area. And it's amazing what it will detect that you will not normally detect. And the way in which I use it, I don't simply say, oh, well, there's a penguin in my square, so I'll write down penguin. It's a source for hypotheses. So if it says there's a bluebird, it says it here's a bluebird. They say, oh, bluebird. Well, let me listen, see if I can hear or find a bluebird. And then you go and try and track it down. But I find it very accurate, even at this point. So, for example, I was in the Ellis Swamp the other day, and it reported sandhill cranes. Well, I didn't see any sandhill cranes, but I know that we all know they're there. We know that they nest there. So if it says it heard sandhill cranes, that's reliable. But it turns up other things too. It turned up pie-billed grebe and a variety of other things. And if you go into the wooded areas, it finds all sorts of thrushes that you might overlook or not hear. And so I find it a great asset in that way. You have to use it as an aid rather than simply relying on what it is.
I think honestly, Ken, I think that's why the recording way they're finding is become very, very helpful, because they are doing exactly that. They're picking up stuff that people just don't pick up themselves. And I do fear that it will skew the numbers a little bit, this Atlas, but in truth, it probably will make them truer than the numbers in the previous Atlas. Like I don't know, like just so you guys know, the most abundant species in the last Atlas, does anybody want to take a guess what the most abundant species was in the last Atlas? I'll take it seriously.
Morning dove.
Morning dove, well, that's a good guess. Anybody else?
Chickadee.
Chickadee? Yeah, that's a good guess too.
Nashville warbler.
You got it. See, Steve, you probably read the book. It was Nashville warbler. they estimated a population over 12 million. I mean,
Wow.
that's pretty incredible, right? But when you start hearing that, you know, how many Connecticut warblers, I bet you I could ask Connecticut warblers on this meeting, and how many people have actually, like, I've seen one for 2 seconds and heard one twice other than that in my, like, I've been birding since I was 11. So, you know, these guys get these recordings going up north, and suddenly they're hearing Connecticut warblers just singing all over the place. So, you know, I think it's important that we're doing this kind of stuff. And as Ken said, there are tools out there, not only Merlin, but like even online, you can check out tools like Dendroica. That's got a fantastic way to quiz your, you know, your hearing ability and stuff like that. Dendroica Canada is, I use it as a tool even myself still. I go in and test myself to hear. Merlin does have the capability to, like, almost like Shazam music. You can, as he says, you can try and identify a bird you don't quite know. You know, today I use Merlin actually for the red-shouldered hawk that we heard attacking that golden. So I should mention that today I had a really interesting sighting north of Wingham. We actually had a red-shouldered hawk that came off a bush lot, very upset, and went up and attacked a young golden eagle at about 200 feet up above our heads. We wouldn't even have seen the golden if it hadn't been for the fact the red shoulder went up after him, because it was over and gone fairly quick. But you know, that's the kind of thing that we see on the atlas. So then, you know, how do you explain that? Well, that's probably a red-shouldered hawk that in that big a bush up there, it may well be on territory, which would be a great sighting. I haven't decided that yet, but yeah, those are the kind of things. And you can get some great birds. I had a northern mockingbird, a young northern mockingbird in Huron County. I mean, it just popped up in front of me and hopped around, and it was clearly a young bird, and it was a mockingbird as best I could tell. So, you know, I wrote it up and put it in, and that then goes up to the provincial level, and the guys at the provincial committee decide ultimately, you know, what is accepted and what's not. But so far in all of here in Perth, my crew is doing pretty good. Anita and all you guys and Brent, we had 2 records so far of the whole first year that were rejected, and mostly because they were weird records that they were borderline. Okay. But yeah, it's, the data's been pretty clean. It's been good, and that's a good news thing, right? It's good for statistics. Anybody else? Yep. Dave Johnson down there. Oh, that's
It's Sharon. Who has the
oh,
question.
Sharon. Yeah, hi, Sharon.
Yeah, I have a really basic question. I know
Sure.
there's codes, you know, for carrying nesting materials and,
Yep.
you know, what you're observing. Where do we find that list and the instructions
So
for those
on
codes?
that first screen that I showed you,
Uh-huh.
and actually I can show you that if I share my screen again just for a second here, just a sec. I can just hear the Great Dane outside my door. She's whining because she wants to get in with me. That would be back here. Actually, do I have those up already? It's just hard to see because this one thing is right over top of my tabs. Okay, actually, I'm going to go just back to the thing and get it. So if you go here under tools and resources on that website, the coding sheets, and then you go breeding evidence codes. So just so everybody knows, and I can mention this just briefly, when you're actually trying to determine, you see a bird, you may have a cardinal, for instance, that's been singing around your neighborhood for the last couple of weeks. So initially that bird could be either just in habitat or singing, but you got to wait for about a week, because once he's been there about a week, he's probably on territory. And that's the other thing, is I'll mention that there's another chart that we use heavily, and that's this one here. And if you look, things like rock pigeons, like our feral pigeons around, they can breed anytime throughout the entire year. I mean, they literally can breed anywhere throughout the entire year. Okay. If you have great horned owls, well, they're well underway, you know, even in November, December, same with screech owls. The crossbills can be breeding all the way through the year. So then back to your codes, when the time comes, you're trying to figure out, you know, what the heck do I need to put on this bird for a code? You get all these different codes, and that does confuse a few, you know, some people, right? But it goes all the way up from, it's possible because they're, you know, on habitat or singing. I may see a pair of cardinals that have been singing over a week is T. Then I can get up into the absolutely confirmed when you get cardinals, say nest building, or you got finches nest building, or you got adult bald eagles sitting on a nest or going on and off a nest that, you know, already like a month ago. Those birds are all AE, and that's confirmed breeding. So those are your different levels. You can be possible, probable, or confirmed. And I'll tell you, it's great when you get nests with eggs in them or nests with young in them. And you know that bird is actually right there and breeding on your square. So, but no, that's a good question there. I should totally meant to
Okay,
show
so
you guys
just
that.
just following from that.
Yep.
So where I'm doing Ebird, you're not pulling things from Ebird, but if I register and then I pull files through from my Ebird
Yep.
into this system, then you'll have that for the areas where I'm posting them. If I'm pulling data through, do I have to pull it through individually or a whole list, or does it just pull the ones that I put some of these codes?
No, it does your whole checklist. So
Okay.
when you say import from Ebird, the only thing you need from Ebird is actually this number
Yep.
right here, that S, whatever it is. That's the
Yep.
number you'll put in, and you'll just say import from Ebird, and boom, it's done. The whole thing goes in. Now, the only thing I will mention is a few things have caught people up is that the codes used on Ebird, most of them are the same, but there's a few that aren't quite the same. Okay, like AE is, I think, on Nest in Ebird, like ON or something like that. There's a couple that they translate for you, but you'll know when you see them on the Nature Count side, it'll be these codes that you see on my screen, but on the Ebird side, it might be something just slightly different. Okay.
But the general information from my Ebird lists that doesn't have any breeding information attached is not really that useful. Would it be better?
Oh,
if I
absolutely,
just-
it's useful. No, it's absolutely
It's still
useful because
useful?
even though you don't have, even if you're seeing birds, they don't
Mhm.
necessarily have breeding evidence. That's still birds that like from the atlas's point of view, they say, hey, well, there was birds on this neck of the woods coming through here. They could be staging there. You could have tons of ducks and stuff like at West Perth
Mhm.
wetlands. That's important, right? Because that helps them know where the birds are. They may not be breeding there, but the atlas is also about abundance too, right? Not just about breeding. So
Okay. That
yeah, no,
answers
it's a
my
good question. Actually, that's
Thank
an
you.
excellent question. And it brings all your details and everything, right? The only thing it can't do yet is video and audio. So if your eBird report has, or sorry, not video, well, sound bites, yeah, and pictures, they don't come over to the Nature Counts side. They only would stay on the eBird side. Right now, Nature Counts doesn't have the means to hold the pictures and the sound bites. And some people, like it may come before the end of the atlas, but that's just not on the front burner. There's too many other things they're trying to do to make it more useful. So, any other questions?
Yes, I have one. It's Anne, sorry.
Yep. Go ahead.
I can't find that e-birding, anything on the thing. Is there anybody that can, I've got white hair, but I am once I learn something, I'm quite good at following it. And I do like the birding thing, the breeding thing, because I've got lots of nests that I monitor all the
Yep.
time. I've got
Yep.
about 140. So, but if somebody can, it's interesting to see, but I have no idea where to find it.
Well, let me talk about two things here. eBird I find eBird is actually a little more intuitive than the Nature Counts app. They're very close, and the functionality, like you're doing the same thing. You're picking a location on a map. You're telling them what time of day it was, what date it was, how many people were in your group, and things like that. Same with eBird. You do literally the same things, right? So, eBird, there's lots of good tutorials and lots of good help on eBird. If it's just a case of getting it going, you don't have to have an app or anything on a phone to do eBird. If you have a computer, as you obviously do to be on this call, or a tablet, you can do it on that and just do it through the browser. Like you literally can just go to eBird on the browser and do your eBird there. And then if you want to do Nature Counts, the same thing. You can do that on a browser on the website. You don't have to have it on an app on the phone. And that's what a lot of people don't recognize, is that there's an online portal that you just need a browser. You can be in Safari, Google Chrome, Edge, Microsoft Edge, any of those. You can just go to those websites. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if somebody would be, I mean, I could help you try and set it up if you really are keen on getting into eBird. I could certainly help you set that up. It wouldn't take very long at all. So that was June, right? That was June that was asking that.
And Malay.
Aaron, the lady.
Oh, Emily. Oh, Emily. Oh, sorry, June. I thought it was Ann. Oh, that's Ann. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I
and
there's two of
you
us
come and
that
see me
go.
at the wetlands sometime. We can talk too.
Okay, all right.
Sorry, guys. There's just so many on my screen. I just couldn't see who was actually talking for a second. I should set
Let
it
me
to
mention
speaker.
one other device that I find particularly helpful this time around. It's the last time it was always very difficult to figure out, well, I'm in the square or am I not in the square? Where's the boundary? Well, iNature has all the squares in it, so you can drive along and you can say, oh, right here, here's where the boundary is. So that reduces that problem a whole bunch. But I also know that these squares correspond to the squares that are used by map art. So if you have a map art map book of whatever region, there are squares on it, and these are the squares that we use. So I'm looking at my square right now, and it is exactly the square that I've determined by driving around. So it's a lot easier this time around to figure out whether you're in the right place or not,
Yeah.
and whether you're gone over the boundary or not. So
Yeah, that is the beauty
It's a
about
lot
the phone
easier.
app. The phone app is fantastic because it not only shows you the boundaries of the map overlaid, like it's literally, I use Google Maps to do mine on the app on Google Maps. And it also has all the point counts. I can drive right up to the point count. You know, the GPS on my phone makes sure I'm exactly where the point count is showing. So, you know, we've come a long ways, obviously, with phones and stuff these days. The only thing that is a downfall is that if you get in an area that has very poor reception cell wise, you might not be able to do your checklist, but it'll still give you the GPS most times. So, and the map boundary is shown as a big red square on your map that you see on the phone, so you can make sure you don't. But if you have physically the map atlas thing that you've got, you could see like on a paper map exactly where you are too, right? So
I was in the Ellis Swamp the other day, and it got to the point where there was no cell reception. I guess
Yeah.
for some reason they don't.
yeah, there
concern
wasn't a lot
themselves
north of
with
Wigan
reception in the
either.
Ellis Swamp. So then you can't locate yourself or do reports. in
Yeah,
that particular spot.
there was a huge discussion with the RCs because there was a lot of kickback from some of the folks that were, you know, non-technology within some of these regions. Okay. And, you know, we said, well, there's nothing wrong with taking a notebook with a nice, you know, waterproof cover on it and going out in the field and take your notes the way you used to. And then you go home and you just get on a web browser, you know, on your Wi-Fi at home and just put the stuff in if that's what you need to do. And I think we did get a lot of people were happier with that's still what they do. Like my buddy Matt, he's never owned a phone in his life. He's whatever, 73 this year, and he will never own a cell phone. He hates them, right? So he goes and everything he does is on a notebook, and he goes home and then he does it on his computer. So it's kind of funny, but I'm trying to be a little more tech upwardly mobile because I'm still behind my daughter and son in terms of what phone I use, but at least it works, and you know, it's not bad. So
We have some people in our group that still use write lists, you know,
yeah, yeah.
not mentioning Steve's name.
Steve
And he
puts up
goes
his
home
thumb.
and
Yeah,
transposes it someplace.
actually, milady, if you want to talk to somebody that knows eBird, that's the guy. Steve has actually got, man, you got way more checklists than I do. I know that. That's the other interesting thing is that, you know, the Atlas is really, being a regional coordinator myself, it's been really fascinating to see how some people bird and where some people bird and some of the records that I receive. It's been like really eye-opening. And it was kind of an interesting question. We had like questions like, okay, so I walk a trail out and I record all the birds as I'm going out, but then as I'm coming back, do I like, because it wasn't a loop. So somebody walks out 2 clicks and then they come back down the exact same path. And I said, well, what happens if I see those same birds again? Like, what am I counting? What's in the atlas? You know, am I double counting? And, you know, you don't really think about that. So we had to actually discuss that at the RC meetings and say, okay, what are we going to give, you know, as a rule on that? So the idea is when you go all the way out, that's sort of one session going out. And when you go to come back, you would only tally in new species that you're seeing that weren't the species you saw before, kind of thing, right? But, you know, these are things that we're, you know, having to think about. And there's a lot of questions about breeding code evidence. We're seeing behavior from species that we never saw before, and they're having to decide, well, you know, what is going on? Like that kestrel that's got a stick. You know, why is a kestrel carrying a stick? Who knows? Somebody needs to get this side, pull them aside, and say, "Why are you carrying a stick? You know, are you going to be showing off to the girlfriend that you can get sticks, but you don't really need a stick? You know, I've got a big stick. My stick's bigger than his stick. Who knows, right? So, have to put too fine a point on it. But, anyways, it's been an interesting experience for me as an RC because last time I was only an atlaser. I only had to worry about, you know, my 3 or 4 squares. So, you know, think about it. If you're interested, you can certainly talk to me. I will gladly help you get registered. I just had another person register. She phoned me and said, or texted me and said, I've got 2 great horned owl nests, both with babies in them. I got 5 bald eagle nests, and I got about 6 or 7 red-tailed hawk nests all over the region. Are you interested? I was like, are you kidding? So I
Yeah.
actually got to see one of the great horned owl nests today on my way back through from Liam. And sure enough, there was two babies poking their heads up, and they're at least probably 3 or 4 weeks old, with
Yeah.
mama sitting right with them. So, you know, that's the thing. She's not even a birder. She just is somebody that goes around and photographs wildlife and does stuff like that. But she just happened to get word from another guy who is an atlaser, and he said, "Oh, you got to talk to Dave Brown. He wants to hear that." So that was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Any other questions, guys?
One other thing you didn't mention was the question, when? When does it start? Or
Sorry.
has it
Yeah, I
started?
guess I'm terrible. You know, as far as the atlas, there's just so much to it. But you're right. In terms of true atlasing, that chart that I showed you where the birds are breeding and it shows that by like in the months and when it starts to show the dark blue is when their breeding dates are. That chart is really unique. But what happens is there's certain species that breed early, like great horned owl and screech owls and stuff that you have to start looking for in like March or April, especially, right? They're the big months for that. But there's other owls like long ear that you don't even look at till July. You start looking for the young, begging and things like that because they're so secretive. You would never find them. They don't respond to callbacks. Say. But you know, the bulk of the atlas actually runs from May 24th to July the 10th. Those are what we call the peak dates for the atlas. Stuff before that, you know, most species that are breeding before that, you'll know which ones those are, like the owls, like the eagles, you know, things like cardinals, nuthatches, chickadees, some of the woodpeckers. But once you get to that May 2-4, if you were to look on that blue chart that I showed you that had the blue and the orange and the light blue,
Mhm.
that basically the dark blue is like everything after May 2-4 is pretty much in dark blue at that point because that's all your warblers, all your flycatchers, everything that relies on bugs and other things like that, insectivores that need stuff here. That usually waits till like May 24th, and then bang, they're off to the races and nesting. And actually, they suggest going back in later in the season because that's when you start seeing young and parents carrying food and so on because the eggs have hatched and now you've got active nests. So it's great to go in early in the season and then you take a bit of a break and then you go in later in the season, say 3 or 4 weeks later, after most of these birds have passed their dates for gestation and so on, and bang, suddenly you got young in the nest and stuff like that. So
Good.
yeah, no, that's a good question. Sorry, Ken, I totally forgot I didn't mention that. Anything else that I didn't mention? Anybody can think of?
I think Bob had a question here.
Yeah, Bob, go for it.
I live in Stratford. Let's say I'm up on the escarpment
Yep.
and just doing some birding, and I see a winter wren.
Yep.
And I want to report that. Can you accept for the atlas just random sightings like that might be of interest?
So that's exactly what I was talking about before. Those are what we call general atlasing. If you weren't birding, they would be incidental. Like if I'm driving down the road along the escarpment and I see a bald eagle go sailing by along the escarpment, that might be incidental and you would mention that. But all of those reports can go in to the atlas this time around because it doesn't matter what square you're in. When you go home and sit at your computer and go on and look on the map where I showed you how to submit there and you look at a map and you just go until you see the escarpment and it will tell you what square you're in. And then you literally go in and say, I was there at this time of day on this date. This is how many people I was with and this is how far I drove. Maybe I drove a half click or no kilometers at all. I was sitting at the side of the road. And then you put in the species you saw, including winter wren, and you hit submit. That entry goes in and the RC, so the regional coordinator for that region, wherever that square is for the escarpment, he would get that report or she would get that report and process it if it's unusual. If it's not unusual, it's probably just automatically accepted by the system. No different than Ebird. So that's the beauty about this atlas is you could be anywhere in Ontario and actually contribute as long as you're a registered atlaser on the website. That's all it takes. And that literally takes 5 minutes. So, and you get to pick the regions that you most likely would be in as well.
But I should get registered.
Absolutely. If you're going to try and put entries in, whether you do Ebird today, you would still have to register on the Nature Counts website to actually be able to drag them over or to just put them right straight into Nature Counts. I tend to do the Nature Counts first and let it automatically create my Ebird reports for me. So I get them in both, but the Ebird side, I don't even have to do it. Just as soon as I hit submit on the Nature Count side, it puts it right over into the Ebird side. So I tend to do it Nature Counts and push the Ebird, but other people like to do Ebird because they know it so well. And then they go to Nature Counts and say, just import using that S number, whatever number was on the your checklist. So from Ebird.
That's
That's a
helpful.
good question though.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Well, thanks, Dave, for enlightening us on this
Yeah.
this
Oh,
exciting
it's enjoyable.
activity which is about to begin. I hope that, I expect that everybody on this program will get involved in one way or another. As I said before, you don't have to take a square. You can help others, or you can go do it on your own. And once again, I make the offer that everybody wants to come and help me with my 3 squares, I guess. I have 3 square meals a day and 3 squares naps.
Good.
There are
is a
many
good
ways to
group activity.
participate without burdening yourself or without feeling a heavy responsibility.
Yeah, it can be a great group activity too, because even if the bunch of you go out, say 5 or 6 in a group, you can all, you could have just one person has a registered account and they could go in and do the entry for everybody, or, often in Ebird, people all put in their own reports, they all go to the Westbrook wetlands and everybody puts it in. All of those reports are perfectly fine coming across the nature counts. So, if you guys feel like that's something you want to do as a small group too, it's that's certainly welcome. So. No, thanks, guys. I just appreciate the chance to kind of advertise to everybody and sort of
Yeah.
put it out there, because I know it's been tough in here in Perth to get a lot of dedicated birders to take on squares. So, but that's fine. I mean, we kind of knew that. And worst comes to worst is the years. We're only in year 2, so if we start hitting year 3 and we're a little light on getting some of the squares done in point counts, then I myself or Mike Cadman or Mike Burrell or some of the other guys will probably step in to come over and try and help out. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thank you,
Right on.
Dave.
Yeah, thanks, guys.